James. But let's move on then to World War One. What events led up to the U.S. getting into World War One? That was the war that was supposed to end all wars and make the world safe for democracy. It was a war that was prosecuted under Woodrow Wilson's watch. So, talk to us about World War One and how were the American people tricked into getting into that war?
Well, once again, we were told that we had a duty to right wrongs overseas. We were told that the Germans were cutting the hands off thousands of Belgian children. This was investigated after the war. It was not true. When journalists went over there, they couldn't find a single witness to such an event. And of course, these guys like to stick with a winner. The sinking of the Maine had worked in World War, in the Spanish-American War, and so the sinking of a ship would be used again to bring us into this war. Ships going down are good because they're underwater, they're hard to investigate. American people were told this about the Lusitania. Now, this was a British passenger ship. When it was sunk in May of 1915, we were not yet involved in World War I, but it was going strong between the Axis and the Central Powers and the Allies, including Britain. Britain wanted very much to bring us into the war, and Winston Churchill was at the head of this plot. He was the one who violated what was called the cruiser rules. He had his own merchant vessels armed in order to ram German submarines, which prevented the U-boats from surfacing to allow passengers to disembark. And he expressly said in his post-war book that he had done this in the hopes of bringing America into the war. He was hoping that some German sub-commander would, through the defective vision of a periscope, would mistake a American ship for a British ship and sink it. Well, that didn't happen. He wasn't getting satisfaction, so the next best thing was to have a British ship sunk with Americans on board. The Lusitania, Americans were told that the Lusitania, which was a British passenger ship on its way from New York City to Liverpool, 128 Americans died when it went down. And we were told that the Germans sank it just to kill women and children. That was not the case. The Germans were under a catch-22. This ship had on board, this is what the American people didn't know, it had over 6 million rifle cartridges, over 50 tons of shrapnel shells, about 50 tons of aluminum powder, which the British used in their mines. It had tons of gun cotton, which they used in their explosives. And the Germans had a choice, either let this get blamed for killing women and children or let all this war material get to the front and kill your German soldiers. Well, they sank the ship. It went down in just 18 minutes after one torpedo hit. But the other thing you need to know about the Lusitania, it was sent directly into the known path of a U-boat. Winston Churchill was the head of the British Admiralty. He was in the map room. He saw that the Lusitania was on a collision course with the U-20. The U-20 had sunk 2 steamers the previous day. They already had the reports of that. In addition to that, British naval intelligence had cracked Germany's naval codes, and they were getting the intercepts when these U-boats would surface. So they knew that the U-20 was there, and they sent the Lusitania in, contrary to all protocol, with no escorts, even though there were 4 destroyers at the nearby port of Milford Haven. You can read about this in the book, The Lusitania by Colin Simpson, but I'll give you one quote. This is from Patrick Beasley, former officer in British Naval Intelligence. He's considered the leading authority on the history of British naval intelligence. Here's what he wrote in his book, Room 40, about the Lusitania. Quote, "Nothing, absolutely nothing was done to ensure the liner's safe arrival. I am reluctantly driven to the conclusion that there was a conspiracy deliberately to put the Lusitania at risk in the hope that even an abortive attack on it would bring the United States into the war. Such a conspiracy could not have been put into effect without Winston Churchill's express permission and approval," unquote, Patrick Beasley. So we have, by the way, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for us at that time was Franklin D. Roosevelt, cousin of Winston Churchill, and when the Maine sank, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy was Franklin D. Roosevelt's cousin on this side, Teddy Roosevelt. Both Teddy and Franklin, after these incidents, went on to become governor of New York and then president of the United States. Quite a pattern.
Quite a pattern. Well, who was, who were some of the financial interests that might have been interested in getting us into World War I?
Well, definitely Bernard Baruch, who Woodrow Wilson made head of the War Industry Board. He is said to have made more than $100 million personally off the war. But Ferdinand Lundberg, once again, did an incredible job of documenting what went on. Actually, he just quotes the Graham Committee of Congress. Post-World War I, the Graham Committee of Congress documented that the banksters had defrauded the American public out of $6 billion. This was for armaments that were never manufactured or delivered to the front. We're talking about aircraft, artillery shells. $6 billion. Indictments were handed down. They were all quashed. No bankster went to jail. That was one facet of the war. But one thing I've learned is that these wars are multidimensional. Like the Spanish-American War wasn't just about the sugar industry. It was about destroying Spain as a power and making America into the world's policeman. World War I had many purposes. One of I think the one that many of your listeners are most familiar with, it created the first formal world government, the League of Nations, which were headed more and more towards the tyranny of world government. It also was used to ignite the Soviet Union revolution that created it, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, funded from the banksters in Germany, England, and here in America, specifically Kuhn Loeb, which financed Leon Trotsky's trip to Russia after the Tsar had abdicated. But in addition to that, it produced the Balfour Declaration, which set the stage for the generation of the State of Israel, the modern political State of Israel. I'm not talking about a biblical or godly Israel, but a political Israel, funded by the same Rothschild interests that funded world government and communism. So you have a multitude of purposes. I might also mention that 6 months before Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, starting World War I, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, and of course that resulted in the government counterfeiting machine that funds all these wars. So there's a whole lot of tie together here, a whole lot of continuity.
Right. So now the Citicorps or city banks didn't have to go it alone now. They had the Federal Reserve that could socialize the cost of these wars and pass them on more directly to the populace through taxation and inflation, I guess.
That's right, and that's why you had the Federal Reserve being created the very same year, 1913, that the income tax was passed. There was no income tax in America, as I'm sure most of your listeners know. Before 1913, it had been ruled unconstitutional in 1895. And the senator who proposed the income tax amendment had also proposed the original Federal Reserve legislation, which later was embodied in the Glass-Owen Act. That was Senator Nelson Aldrich, the maternal grandfather of David Rockefeller.
Exactly right. Okay, well,